All right, so picking it up where we left off, which was in chapter 15 here. I was kind of toward the end when I had to stop. My son was starting to try to get my attention on that last one. So I had to stop real quick. But we'll pick it right up here. Notice that as soon as Rick comes downstairs, this is after procuring the goat, the phone calls start coming, right? It's time to pick up with retiring more androids. So the job only seems to, we talk about that hamster wheel, I think, with Phil Resch a little bit. It seems like that hamster wheel, because of his devotion to this animal, his need for a real animal, and buying this goat, now it's just going to be a continuation of disposing of androids and perhaps being that form destroyer that he's kind of realized himself to be, of course always reflecting with Phil in mind. So he gets a call from Harry Bryant. Bryant translates to strong, and that makes perfect sense for us because what Deckard is in need of is resilience at this point, strength, right? To keep doing this job, despite the fact that it's weighing upon him morally and ethically at this point in time, and maybe other ways too. Bryant gropes around his desk. We still tend to find that diction being used, right? That takes us back to kind of male abuse of power, I think, the groping, right? Androids accused of unlawful flight, right? That's what these androids are being accused of. And I think unlawful flight is an interesting play on words from Philip K. Dick, because what it really, I think, translates to as flight is religious kind of ascension or aspirations within religion to be a part of that, and that whole idea of maybe rebirth and salvation, but unlawful, that androids are not allowed to take part in that state of mind, really, right? In that collective empathic process. They are kept from religion and ascent and salvation. Rick at this point says he needs to rest, right? As we go from 6 to 7 in terms of the biblical significance there. He says he will buy a sheep for compensation of all the destruction he has caused, and that would make sense, right? If he were to obtain a sheep, and what that represents in terms of the parable of the sheep and the goat, he is starting to take notice of the pain, the real suffering, what he can start to calculate as real in his mind, and he's starting to realize that they need help. I think that's the overall kind of character, the arc of a kind of character change that we see with him. All right, moving forward. Rick mentions that Mercer is lucky in the sense, Wilbur Mercer, because he escapes the human condition, being a 6, right? Being a flawed human being in this kind of world where we seek salvation and kind of a renewed possibilities. He's able to do that, but Rick isn't, right? He does not have to violate his own humanity like a soldier may, or in the case of this story, a bounty hunter. Mercer tells Rick there is no salvation. He kind of comes clean on some of the great mysteries here, and it's a bit, I guess this is the purpose of it, it's supposed to be a bit anticlimactic, right? Where things start to break down a little bit here. This says something about persistence in having to live with sin, you know, that you're always going to have to live with it. This is a paradox because we have a creation destroying creation, which could be a universal condition. It's the universal condition in the sense that as creation we try not to destroy, but some of us may find ourselves within those types of general roles, and I think obviously Rick does at this point in time. Aran thanks him for bearing the stones when they do when they get on the empathy box, right? So she thanks him for being the one to take on that harm, right? To take on that pain. And I guess that does remind us of Christ, right? How important that character is within that religion, due to the idea that he took on all of that pain because of the sins of the world, right? The collective sin. So it speaks to that kind of vicarious engagement we have with key characters. And Mercer kind of fits that a little bit here. Rick then calls, finally Mercer sort of gives them a pass, and I'll let you make of that what you want, but we find out more about Wilbur Mercer as the story continues. Here he seems to give Rick a pass for having to eliminate android after android in order to procure an animal and do all these things. He kind of just gives him a pass on the whole thing. You would think he would, as this kind of, as this figure of kind of religion, he would be the one who has this major moral or ethical judgment, but not as directly as maybe you would think. Maybe it's still happening. We'll see what happens through the rest of the text, but here he seems to give him a pass. Rick then calls on Rachel, which is ironic in that he is declaring that he needs help, and she is able to provide it to him through empathy, right? So maybe this is a display of empathy. She does care enough to help him when he is in a state of need. Is he now doing the same thing for androids? As he talks to her, he is reminded of real physical pain. He threatens to retire the Andes if she does not come down, right? She has to come down as a savior to remediate him. This we talked about earlier, a goat being kind of taken from something above. And I think maybe this is where it comes to, which is being saved by Rachel, being saved by a figure like Rachel, despite the fact that she's an android, right? Let's not forget what the name translates to, female goat, female sheep. So in terms of that parable, she is right on the right side, literally the right side of God. She is on the favorable side, right, as the sheep. She mentions to him that goats smell terrible, right, passing some kind of judgment, and that would make sense seeing her name, Rachel. Notice the name Rachel again is Hebrew as well, right? 6 androids in one day. That number is just repeated so much, 6. Rick headed, and again, almost like the day of creation, right? Humans were made in one day, right? This whole idea of 6 and flawed humanity. 6 androids in one day. Rick is headed to match the record set by a man named Franklin Powers. Let's check out the name real quick, because you don't find this name will only be mentioned right here in the story. Franklin translates to free landowner. You find so many of these characters' names, especially smaller, minor, or bit characters. Their names seem to line up. They seem to help us solidify a meaning here, a theme that maybe we didn't see beforehand. And it has a lot to do with like land ownership and land availability. You see names that specifically deal with land. Penfield mood organ. Pen is enclosing people within land, right? And starting to enclose them, right? Putting up a pen. Here we have Franklin translates to free landowner. All right, who disposes of the obsolete Macmillan Y4 variety. And Macmillan, just to follow that, more kind of language given to us, more proper names given to us. Macmillan translates to bald religious order. So what you have here in the end, when you follow this all the way through, is the last person to set a record in terms of eliminating androids were eliminating the obsolete Macmillan varieties, and those Macmillans are bald and of a religious order. So in a way, the previous bounty hunter before Rick, who was doing a lot of work, was eliminating people, androids symbolically from kind of a religious background, right? And I guess this could be true historically of great empires who start to persecute Christians and Catholics and other religious groups really throughout the world when they start to run counter to the empire, right, and kind of the mainstay civilization of the time. Rick accuses her of vengeance, and she looks at him wide-eyed, exemplifying her sheep-like eyes and empathic ability. Rick wants Rachel to spend the night with him, a human with an android, and this perfectly replicates the real goat being with the fake sheep, that whole hypothetical scenario set up by Iran and Rick earlier in the text. Can we put a real goat with a fake sheep? Well, guess what? Rick is the real goat, Rachel is the fake sheep, and we're going to find out. We're going to find out, all right? They plan on meeting at St. Francis. Now you're getting some religious proper titles here, some proper names here. St. Francis. Who is he? Lots. He's one of the most important. He is probably the premier saint, right? When you talk about all the saints that are out there. What is he the patron saint of? Here we go. Animals. Makes sense for this book. Merchants. Makes sense for this book. Stowaways. That's an interesting one. Right? Stowaways. In a way, when you think about the mutiny of the androids and stowing themselves away, in a way, getting back to Earth, that one even fits a little bit. He was known for his love of the Eucharist, right, the symbol. Receives the stigmata in 1224. So we actually get reference to a saint who did, as at least is written down in some kind of record here, experience that stigmata that we've talked about before. That's really what the empathy box and getting on there and kind of, you know, following through with Mercer is all about. You walk away with the actual pain inflicted on Mercer, just like stigmata is somebody all of a sudden waking up miraculously to the actual pain, not just the feeling or the sense of it or the idea of it, but the actual wounds that Christ experienced, right? In order to make you relate directly to that pain and suffering. It's no longer just mental. There's no longer this mental or psychological distance between you and it, which is largely how a lot of religion operates. So we have these examples of stigmata where the wounds are there and they must be recognized and dealt with, right? And you feel that pain, taking you closer to the impetus, which might be in that case Christ, in the case of this story, Mercer, right? Lastly, a couple things here. It's described as a decent hotel, and I think that's a powerful word here, a little piece of diction, because we are talking about decent human beings, right? A decent mind, a decent person. And maybe this starts to blur the lines between human and android at this point, because we're really just trying to find decency. It doesn't matter where it comes from. Rachel, we know, has the body of a young girl. This is very much in contrast to Luba Luft, who had the body of a grown woman. Right? So in a way, something's missing, that transition. Hence the need for that piece by Munch, Puberty, right? And we'll recall that here in just a moment. We go into chapter 16. The hotel room is described as sumptuous and enormous. I think this is sexual language. In a way, kind of getting us, you know, pulling those topics and themes of sexual interaction, the power, the dynamics of power there, men, women. We talk about 1940s, 1950s, very different than, as I sit here, 2021, filming this lecture in Southern California, right on a beautiful day, albeit windy. But we are talking about contexts where men seem to have positions of dominance and authority, right? More so than we would probably find today. Thank goodness, right? So anyways, it's a register of themes to come, right, pretty much. Rick is attracted to Irmgard. He imagines that the escaped Andy, so there's that idea of attraction. He knows he would be attracted to her, probably because she has the body of a grown woman too. But here comes Rachel, the body of a young girl, right, almost prepubescent or going through it. Rick imagines the escaped Andys were probably field laborers with aspirations for something better. This is so important. This is key. I got a big star written down to this note because this is the development of Rick's character. Does he continue to see androids as unsentient beings that have no aspirations of their own? Everything is simply programmed and therefore a very sad reality for these androids. It's programmed in, right? Think of The Matrix and some other movies that have kind of explored that idea. And he says maybe as they're working the fields, we talk about slave labor. Looking back to the text, chapter 2, direct references to the halcyon days, which means the glorified days of slave times in the U.S., right? Where they just worked in the fields and everything was kind of harmonious and had this kind of balance and order to it, right? Check out Professor Blight, B-L-I-G-H-T, on YouTube. He's got some of his open history classes, and you can learn a lot and educate yourself about that time period. Don't let life pass you by and not educate yourself on some of the history of this country or other places around the world as well. History is super important. So he's starting to see them as individuals who want something more out of their lives than just field labor, right? This kind of slave labor that's been hoisted upon them, forced on them. It is important for Rick to acknowledge this in the androids. This is the analogy like given to us in this story, as Dick explores, the analogy to slaves wanting more of their lives. We get half the title here. Do androids dream? Right? We know it's important when you see the title. Don't gloss over this. You got to stop and be like, all right, here it is. Here's the title. We get half of it. Do androids dream? And I think it's the idea of dreaming of better lives is really how we interpret it. Hope for it. At least that part of it. Of electric sheep is different. We'll get there. All right, here we go. Roy Batty. Roy means king. You know, right away, I think there is some similarities to some characteristics of Christ here. One is in the name, King of Kings. Christ is King of Kings. So here comes Roy, whose name translates to king. And Batty. You look up the meaning of this name, it is rich in land. Another kind of land-based name, where we're talking about an abundance of land, or land that's kept, you know, fenced away, or whatever it's going to be. Here, Batty represents rich in land, right? Maybe this is direct contrast to something like Penfield, being caged in. They have broken that bondage. They have, you know, hurdled those fences in those cages, right? That's where they are right now in this text, trying to escape, trying to get away from it all. Of course, they've killed to do it. Moving forward, this establishes the sacredness of so-called android life. Right? And I think Roy, in some ways, based on those aspirations, he wants to connect to Mercer. He wants to be free. He wants to have a normal life like human beings, despite the fact of where he's been and what he had to do to get away from it. And he needs a rebirth. And I think some of these ideas definitely tie into Christ, right? What he's looking for. Notice the diction used here. Androids engineer a mass killing of humans. It's an interesting way to almost provide a euphemism for the killing that occurs to those humans. Remember, we talk about retiring androids? We're reversing it now, and it's helping us get into that empathic state of mind for androids. They didn't kill, they had to engineer those killings. It was something they had to put together and put into place. It changes, just based on the diction here, the euphemistic language, how maybe we feel about what they did. Just like humans like to create a little bit of distance between the retiring that they do, maybe that's occurring here for what the androids have had to do. They've had to engineer this escape, and killing was just a part of that plan, right? Rachel arrives. All right, it's been a long flight, and I think that makes perfect sense for us, because I think this is a character based on her name, based on her empathic feelings toward Rick, who has maybe already achieved some kind of grace or salvation, and maybe she's here to help Rick, and so therefore we have a long flight already. She's wearing a long fish scale coat. We get reference to fish yet again, Christ, right? The era of Pisces, right? We're in the era of Pisces. And we recall the meaning of her name on the reference to the parable of the sheep and the goat, right? So it's all coming together for her. A very religiously ordained character, I think, Rachel. Right, which is why she has that Hebrew name, taking us right back. Rachel has the body of a prepubescent girl. And I think, and I apologize that when I tried to show the pictures on a previous lecture, it was outside sunlight and it was horrible, so I apologize for that. But you can look it up, Munch puberty. This is probably what we imagine in our minds, right? And remember, Rick had a kind of Philip K. Dick had a propensity for women like this in his fiction. Kind of long, pale, dark hair, right? So we tend to see this. But that's a great image to get in mind, I think. I think it's all kind of designed that way. Moving forward, however, despite the fact that she has the body of a young girl, her eyes are said to be that of a grown woman. So a wonderful paradox given to us, right? You talk about the reflections on life, the deep soul that could be there, whatever it's going to be, however you need to kind of put it into words. The eyes, right? They look like that of a grown woman. He notices When he looks at her, he notices that she has a kind of hunter body type, right? He notices the restless, shrewd eyes. Restless is an interesting word because thematically I think that's what we're kind of looking for here is rest. Moving on from 6. Who else is restless? The baddies in Pris. Let's not forget how restless they are as they sit in Isidore's apartment trying to, avoid detection, right? So you talk about all the restlessness that we are sensing in the story right now. Rachel says that they are all crowded around the demented one calling himself Roy Batty, quote unquote. The demented one. And I think this is where he does seem to fit that Christ-like feel as somebody who has spoken to God and has never happened before, and kind of the lunacy that comes with that experience for the first time, right? And people are surrounding him looking for some kind of guidance, looking for some path forward. And he is that man right now. So when you think about desperate people, surrounding him, looking for leadership, in a way that's what Roy is on some smaller level. I think it does feel like Christ on a much larger level, right? It feels that way. And Rachel even says Jesus. Rachel even exclaims Jesus as well, I think, just to get that reference in here, right? To start making us think thematically about that character to some degree. Rachel starts to talk about her empathic feelings for Pris, right? Knowing that they look exactly the same, almost like two coins that have been stamped out identically. And this is definitely something she thinks about quite often, right? This is interesting too because it could play into Dick and the loss of his twin sister Jane, when she was only like 2 months old, I believe. And that was one of the tragic experiences that obviously affected his psychology, and it enters into his fiction in some ways as well, right? The loss of a twin, the potential loss of a twin here. Rachel shows some exposition. There's a reference to a zygote, quote unquote, a zygote bath DNS factors. And it's just a lot of jargon thrown together, but let's pick it apart and try to make sense of it. Zygote means a fusion of sperm and egg, right? So those two things being brought together. So important because it reminds us of some of the important themes such as rebirth, procreation, right? We have a dwindling human species here that is doing all they can to keep up their numbers, right, in a planet that seems to be decaying and dying around them due to their own nuclear warfare exchanges, right? They kind of did it to themselves. Okay, very good. Zygote, and then it goes to bath. And I think bath here takes you to this idea of redemption. Cleanse, right? That all of this can be cleansed. What it leads to, it's said to lead to a new version of an android, which is a symbol for a new version of man and humanity. It is this that leads to the Nexus 7. So this is the process that it has to go through. Sperm and egg fusion. This whole idea of a bath, which means taking I think what that means is taking humanity and essentially kind of finding a cleanse, right? A rebirth. A state of redemption, a real state of redemption. And this will lead to the Nexus 7, and symbolically 7 is where we want to be, rest, right? After that kind of chaotic 6, right? That whole idea of being here on earth and the difficulties that come with that, we're looking for the 7. We're looking for rest, we're looking for peace, we're looking for salvation, we're looking for grace. I think you can really say all of that, right? The Bonelli test will not be needed, as someday people will be reborn all good. Remember what the Bonelli test translates to is goodness, right? The idea of good. And it won't even be needed after we get to Nexus 7 because thematically the world will be perfect, right? People will be good people. We won't even need to test any longer. To add a little bit of detail to that too, the word hoary is used. I think a hoary people. Old and trite, meaning that when we talk about being 6s, being this imperfect humanity, right? It tends to be just getting caught up on old and trite ideas, right? Lacking in originality, just not being able to move forward in new progressive ways, right? But if we get to this Nexus 7, this kind of state of rest, all goodness within the world, we can find something new. But we're just stuck to these old ways. It's Pris who says, I care whether I get nailed. She's using it colloquially here, meaning like, I don't want to get caught. But of course, we get the nails and of course, you know, the crucifixion of Christ. So I think that's probably going to be a reference to that. Rick says, I have to retire androids and then go home to my wife. And he connects the two. And grinning because she swayed. Consider the thinking and soul needed to do this. As Rachel listens to Rick, she is grinning and swaying back and forth with music. Is that something that can be simply programmed into an android to know when to grin at the right time? Or is that based on a deeper state of reflection that we can say is human-like, right? But think about her movement here. Think about her state of mind, her state of being here. Does it seem to say android to you or otherwise? Rachel has a device that can shut down any android. It suspends its respiration, which reminds me us of Phil Resch saying that he would have held his breath indefinitely if he was an android. So you get a lot of like references to this theme of suffocation throughout this text, whether it be with people, androids, the world itself, right? Everything kind of, you know, just kind of reducing to nothing, a state of suspension even, but a lot of that idea of just kind of dying through, just kind of breath dying out here, right? There's a progression of Rick intruding into Rachel's purse here, which is one place we know we never go. You never go into somebody's purse. And he roots. I've even used that. I remember a college friend of mine used to use that as a idiomatic phrase for having sex, rooting. And I think that's what it's kind of here too. Again, it speaks to protrusion and this idea of kind of invasiveness, but rooting into the purse here, right? As a sheep, makes sense. Her name translates to female sheep. She does not carry a laser. All right. And again, I want to highlight that lack of air and that suspension of breath makes me think of the suffocation of the earth, right? Going down to some kind of final state. But coming back from this, here we have white sheets and the Mission State Police. So there is some possibility of coming back from this, I believe, including the end of text too, and we'll get there. Androids can't bear children. That's one of the ideas and the kind of limitations explored here when it comes to androids. Perfect kind of specimens and designs, all, you know, in every other way, but built-in lifespans. We find out some reasons why, and also, you know, can't procreate here. Rick takes off his shirt and tie. I love the tie because I think that brings us back to 1940s, 1950s kind of society. The man coming home almost as breadwinner, right? And now just kind of taking his clothes off for the day. Coming into home life here. It is the quintessential kind of 1950s breadwinner and domestic wife situation. She urges him not to really think about it, this idea that he's going to have sex with an android and that she's not real. She tells him, don't be philosophical about it, and she says, it's very dreary, it's dreary. She says, I love you, and I think she is definitely the empathic sheep, right? And she is the electric sheep as well, right? Rachel is the electric sheep. So I think when we say, do androids dream of electric sheep, your electric sheep, in the story at least, your best example of that will be Rachel. Do androids dream of some version of themselves? I'm not sure. There's many ways to interpret that title once you start to understand the pieces of it. Rick's throat constricts. There's that strangulation, that suffocation. He is breathless. They sleep together. My question for you is, what do you make of this act? right? On a symbolic level, even on a literal level at this point in the story. Is this just going to complicate things? This is going to make things easier. Remember, Phil gave him the advice that you have to sleep with an android before you can retire the android, so there's that idea that we remember as well. I feel like there is this overall feeling of hopelessness here at the end of chapter 16, but ironic due to the union of these two characters. We have finally gotten our real goat and our electric sheep together. Let's see what comes of this. And here we move on to chapter 17, the aftermath. Very tasteful of Philip K. Dick not to give us, he usually doesn't, from what I've read of his work. He doesn't really get into erotic, kind of scenes or sex scenes, so that's good. We catch up with them after the act. And it feels like a married couple, right? It feels that way. He feels like she is a real human girl. He really thinks she is going to retire Pris. Remember, the whole idea was, I will help you eliminate Pris, right? The android that looks like me, because I think you're going to have a lot of difficulty with this. Rachel wraps herself in a white bath towel. Now, we do not get that. I almost wish I had like a dinger here, like a ding, 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 right? We do not get the color white all that often. Just to retrace a little bit, we had it when he went to the Mission Street. I think that's the first time we see the color white with the white desk, because that's that first kind of state of redemption, right? That's that first kind of step. And now we're seeing it here as well, all right? This white bath towel. Almost taking on the appearance of a sheep too, right? When you think about the cotton towel, it's interesting. And just like her name implies. And she asks if Rick enjoyed the experience, which could be an indication of empathy. That's so cool. Empathy is putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and then maybe, changing what you're doing based on that. And that can even come down to the idea of sexual experience between two people. It's not just about me, it's about you too. So even that exchange shows the empathy. It's interesting. It shows the empathy that Rachel is capable of. Rachel's lifespan, so short, 4 years. And she's already 2 of those 4, right? She's already reached that point. It's said that scientists cannot solve the, and I'll read this, perpetual or semi-perpetual renewal, right? That they can't keep those cells going long enough. There's another reason there's a built-in lifespan too, but that's what the scientists are saying. That idea of a renewal, perpetually renewing, like always renewing itself throughout time, which could speak to an ongoing redemptive kind of mindset, time after time after time, as time goes on. I'm not going to, no spoilers here, but that ties into the beginning of the middle of the last chapter big time. We'll have a reference to something else that is perpetually renewing, and you can come back to this part in the book and we can make some pretty solid connections. They journey to his car that has been parked next to a white-clad human attendant, more white. Maybe what he's gone through here, even his moment spent, his sexual experience, his intimacy, I guess you could even say, with Rachel, maybe this has led to even more of a redemptive kind of change in him. Seeing androids as something different. Rick mentions his goat, shares that it always is expecting to be fed. So if you think about what that goat represents in this term of kind of following, like self-preservationism, only thinking about yourself and not worrying about what other people are going through, then that's an idea that's constantly has to be fed. He's being pulled in that direction. There is something insatiable, cannot be satisfied about the goat here. And that's scary, especially because we're getting late in the story and you would think that some of these issues were going to start ironing themselves out, right? But no, they kind of perpetuate, they kind of keep up. This transitions to his admittance that he would marry her, sees her as an organic entity, which is life. He sees her as an organic entity. And I think organic meaning made of real stuff, an entity, giving it that kind of respect as well, just like we give an entity such as God or a person kind of that respect. Rachel says that she has an effect on all bounty hunters, almost like she is a force to be reckoned with. She is the sheep and Rick is the goat, never understanding, perhaps until this moment, these qualities of selfless concern. But Phil Resch is the exception. Let's not forget about him. he was able to move past Rachel, right? Roy Batty is mentioned as a wonderful spiritual man here, giving him some of those religious qualities, which is kind of ironic because he can be, you know, we've seen the way that he's treated John Isidore in this story, right? He's been very lack of empathy, right? It's just being reversed with John's situation. He's not getting any empathy from these androids. He sort of lies to Rachel here and says that Resh killed Luba. I guess that's true because he aimed to kill, and it was Rick who made sure to kind of, you know, either euthanize or, you know, aggressively kill her. I'll leave it up to you and collect on the bounty. But he kind of lies and says it was Resh. He didn't really mention his role in it. And she says that she and Luba were good friends. And I think if you look at what they represent, even in terms of their names, we just start to mesh all those qualities together, right? These were communal aspects of humanity that joined up, right? They were friends. And we've said a lot of positive things about Luba, I believe, up to this point. The sexual experience causes nominal prevention of bounty killing, retiring, and that's why Rachel's here, right? What she can usually do, she's here to protect androids, we're finding out. She'll sleep with a bounty hunter and it will soften their attitude, right? It might cause them to ease up a bit and then give up the job. So in a way, she is selfless in a way, and she is helping to protect by putting herself in this role. There is a look of grief on Rick's face, evidence that she has made an impact on him, right? Impact on him. She has done this, it's mentioned 7 to 8 times, no, 9 times, right? So she's done this many times before. Rick threatens to kill her, a mental maneuver to control his empathy toward her. She is helpless, with a purse full of kipple, which is kind of strange. She surrenders. We're told that this is a unique android characteristic, this idea of when they know all is lost and there's no way out of a situation, they essentially just kind of deflate into idleness, right? And they kind of give up and surrender. But it feels like it might be able to be applied to people in general, as well as those who give up in the face of an overpowering and wicked and cruel and punishing adversity, right? Groups of people who have been in horrible situations, enslaved, concentration camps. We could talk about many, many examples, right? So it sounds like a lot of people could find themselves, not just androids. It might be it speaks to more of a human condition, this state of surrender that eventually comes over us. Rachel objectively states, bounty hunters like you say you want to kill me, but you can't. Says he won't be able to retire anymore, Andes. And go to your goat and get some rest is what she tells him. And we can start to think of the biblical implications. This is a bit of a contradiction. You can't get to rest through the path of the goat. You can only get to rest through the path of the sheep. So what is she really setting him up for here, right, as we go into chapter 18? The chapter ends with her victory over him. What is that victory? Obviously, it probably speaks to how she's changed his mindset on some of the crucial aspects of his job. How he sees androids. His ability to be callous in the face of their suffering. To turn from it. To not even recognize that it's real. Right? To avoid it altogether. She has a victory over him here. And I think we'll see. There's going to be a nice little victory. Another one too. In the beginning. Here we go. We are moving into chapter 18. In the beginning, we see the master-servant relationship has flipped as Pris orders JR around the apartment doing things. So it's really switched, right? The master-slave relationship, it used to be human to android, now it's android to human, right? They are in control, at least within the smaller context of JR Isidore. And Isidore obliges, kind of gets a kick out of it. He's enthusiastic, and he feels useful, there's the word there, useful for the first time. This reminds me, this is where I'm reminded of some of the backstory to Isis, the Egyptian goddess. One thing it mentions is she loved everybody She had empathy for everybody, including her jealous brother or whatever it was, right? And notice that makes perfect sense for J.R. Isidore. He loves everybody, including these androids who are jealous of who he is as a human, jealous of his status, even as a special, right? And he still loves them, despite their jealousy, despite all of that. Moving forward. It mentions here, life had definitely taken an upswing, right? Ascent. Right? So I think that kind of places us in a pretty positive place thematically as we begin this chapter. Let's see how it goes. We have an ascension, some kind of rebirth. Perhaps it is this idea of compassion and empathy for androids despite who they are, despite what they've done. Just like we would hope to have compassion and empathy for humans despite who they are, despite what they've done, right? It comes down to he really likes having the company, right? And having that kind of social support there. He warms himself. We get the idea of heat. He warms himself at the seat of their presence, which is ironic because they treat him so cruelly. Without empathy, indeed, they are sixes just like humans, right? So in a way, they are us. Just like humans, we see in this book, and we've talked about traditionally, historically, are very capable of cruelty. So are these Nexus sixes, right? I think when we talk about androids, we do talk about androids in this book, but we're always talking about ourselves as well. JR is aware of his horrible treatment, but he simply does not care. Next section. Isidore finds a spider. Notice, we're prepared for this. This is the solitary predator. It's been mentioned before, that knows no empathy. And he traps it in a bottle, so in a way he captures it. If we've said the solitary predator has been the android, that's what humanity is telling us, well, now we have a kind of an animal analogy to that, right? A trapped spider in this bottle. Maybe that's the representation. Moving forward, he pokes a hole with a needle for air supply. Needle, nails, I don't know. See a connection sometimes. Two simultaneous discoveries here. I like this. If you've watched and you should, because talk about some good material. A Streetcar Named Desire is where they do some contrapunctual kind of stuff in the scenes. Same thing here. As Pris gets her hand on this spider and starts to, getting a little ahead of the chapter here, pick apart some of the spider legs, take some of them off, something is happening on TV about Mercerism. Buster Friendly is picking apart all of the various truths that we thought existed about Mercer. And he's starting to pick those off. So as the spider's legs come off, those are being picked off. Another thing, well, let's just get into this. So much going on, right? All right, so it's in a medicine bottle too. I think that's important because it speaks to this aspect of healing perhaps, right? So a medicine bottle. Here, the thought of severing the spider's 8 legs enters into the android's minds, right? Some of the androids. What else is being cut off? Well, android's lifespan, and individual Andes. Remember, there's 8 Andes, 8 legs. I think that's something that matches up perfectly, right? Pris is the one leading the charge on this. Roy and Irmgard are, they're also encouraging, but it's Pris who has a, big role in dismembering the spider. She has a fatalistic view of the spider's prospects of maintaining life. Like, oh, it's going to die anyways, kind of. Fatalism means like there's no hope, right? The way you look at certain situations or life in general. Fatalism. And she has that kind of view here early on. She says there's nothing for it to catch around here anyhow, which just exemplifies the current deadness of their world, right? Earth and what they're living on. And the even worse prospect of going to Mars when you think about, again, thematically, the aggression that's represented by that planet and the initiation of slavery, right? The resurgence of slavery, which speaks to our horrible human nature as well, right? What we're capable of, unfortunately, even on a scale of widespread civilizations. that we still do this to each other. All right? JR says, don't mutilate it, and he says it wheezingly. Notice that air is also being correlated to this experience, tied to this experience. Right? As we treat the spider a certain way, severed legs, JR is starting to have trouble with his breath, losing air supply, but he implores them, he begs them. With each clip of the leg, here's that contrapunctual effect here, with each clip of a leg, an aspect of Mercerism is dejected, frauded, and ridiculed, right, by Buster Friendly. Pris restrains the spider, and she smiles. A bit sadistic, right? So maybe some sadism here. When you find a pleasure in inflicting pain, right? There is no authentic pain if Mercer is not real and the stones are not real. So here, this religion that's been built up throughout this entire text, and John's had some profound experiences, Rick's had some profound experiences along with Iran, and even these androids are dying for some profound experiences. Well, guess what? The big expose is sharing with everybody who watches Buster Friendly, which is a lot of people, that it's not real, right? So if there is no authentic pain, if Mercer is not really hit by real stones, then is it real pain? Is it real meaning? Wilbur Mercer is not suffering at all, is what Buster Friendly tells us. And the way to think about this in some regards is, what if Christ, all that stuff about the crucifixion was never real? What if it's not real? What if it's just made up? We don't know. Like, nobody really knows if that happened or not, right? And that's just historic truth. Nobody really knows. But what if we found out one day that it's completely false, like it was completely frauded, which is what is happening here with Mercerism? My question for you is, would it matter? I think that's the question, right? Would it even matter? Would people pick up and keep going? Does it even need to be real in order to be profound and meaningful and affect people moving forward, right? Poor spider. 3 legs cut off, and it seeks a path to freedom. Freedom being the key word here. We can draw parallels to the androids' lives, slaves' lives, real history, right? It found none, right? There is no path. This is a very dire situation for the spider, which reflects perhaps these androids, perhaps other groups of people throughout history. Mercerism, we find out, was just a movie reel and produced on a set, found on Lark Avenue, right? Lark, when you look into the backstory of what a lark means on a religious level, it's a representation of the humility of the priesthood, which does make sense here, because Mercer is reduced to a dawdling drunk. This big religion that everybody was supposed to be connected to, and it separated android from human, right? Was actually kind of just, not real. Ended up being just a big fake idea. And so maybe by recognizing it as a fake, and here we are, Lark Avenue, it is representing the humility of the priesthood. Something about the humility of our ideas about religion, right, at some point in history, right? We talk about making changes and being more progressive moving forward. It makes sense. Okay, very good. We get the diction of pedestrian. Now he's just a pedestrian. And pedestrian means just an ordinary man or woman. Nothing in comparison to entities such as God and stuff like that, right? Just a pedestrian. Just one person walking on the street out of millions, right? His mind is said to be debris cluttered. This is Wilbur. It made a series of ascension videos. That's what we were watching all this time, was ascension videos. For a boss he never knew or met, kind of feels like God on some subtle, ironic level, right? Somebody you never really meet, but you're still making videos for them and putting this work in. There's a culmination in what Buster Friendly is sharing. Mercerism is a swindle. It's a hoax. You've been conned. And here's where you get your one and only reference to Hitler. Even though we have so many German and Hebrew names, and I think it brings us back to the time period, right? 1940s, 1950s, we talk about World War and possible nuclear annihilation. You get your one reference to Hitler here, and here it is. but it's a huge reference. He says, I'm paraphrasing, somebody like Hitler could have really used this idea of Mercer, and then it cuts off. And I think this is what this is translating to. I'll say this. It's the idea that Hitler, or anyone, any kind of charismatic leader like that with some god-awful agenda, especially when we talk about the Holocaust. It's the idea of Hitler or anyone using religion and some partial use of empathic connection that could bind them during times of atrocity, right? That you are connected to our God, and therefore you are one people that is counter to this other group of people, right? That is against this other group of people. And the idea of God and empathy there kind of binds that group into that unity, right? So that's the way that it could be used here. You keep empathy from others, and I remind you of the Voigt-Kampf empathy test, the bailiff of struggle. I'll tell you if your pain and struggle is real, meaning I'll tell you if you're a human being or not, right? And we can see how that's been used viciously throughout history. It's really unfortunate. 4 legs left, this poor spider, meaning 4 Nexus 6s. Roy walks through the door. He lights a match, puts it by the spider, and it provides the spider with, quote unquote, inspiration that it needs to walk, right? We were just talking about warmth and heat a moment ago with J.R. Isidore wanting to warm himself by the fire of the androids. He felt like they were a fire that he could warm himself with, right? So a little bit of that fire continuing here. When it feels like all is lost, I'll just say this, when it feels like all is lost for that spider, here comes J.R. Isidore, maybe like a Christ-like figure, not totally, but some characteristics, with a flame. A flame is traditionally going around your town, look at some churches, and some of you will see that flame icon, rebirth. Burn down the old, right, with the flame. Here comes the new, right? It makes a path for something new. So notice what happens. Roy comes with the flame. It seems nasty. It seems, again, sadistic. But what he does is he takes a flame and he gives it the inspiration it needs to keep on going in a hopeless situation. So I wanted to put it that way so you can see it negatively. To speak basically for a moment, you can see it on a more positive level, what the flame does for the spider. But it gets it going, right? Moving forward. Isidore takes the spider, drowns it in water. This is accompanied by the impending kippelization, the absence which would win out. He holds a simple ceramic cup. I think it's ceramic to emphasize that idea of simplicity here. And he takes the corpse of the spider and he puts it in the cup, right? He says the corpse of the spider had taken over. Is this the surrender of a species? The giving up and resignation of both a people and a humanity? I think we're experiencing a general decline right here. Isidore sees the dependable donkey, but interrupted by the crow who perches on his muzzle. This is now, he's engaged with the empathy box. He feels like it's the only thing he can do after what they've just done to this spider. Completely out of his control. He didn't want that to happen. Right, so now he's on the empathy box. And he's having very surreal, very surrealistic visions here, right? Seeing certain animals. Remember, the donkey is one of the important animals to Mercer. He's seeing some of these important animals. He sees the crow, which we know by nature as a scavenger, right? Seeks to carry on from what is left behind, feed off of what remains. This life he witnesses here remains. It cannot fully decay. He wants to climb up. He seeks for an ascension here. Correspondingly, he finds the surviving spider. It advances itself haltingly, which is oxymoronic, right? The spider is advancing, but at the same time halting itself from coming forward. Maybe that speaks to the human condition. We're always trying to ascend, or we always are ascending, yet we're halting our own kind of position in this, our own kind of direction in this as well. Spider might be a great example of not just the androids, but really any human being, tied to this earthly existence and the things we must do here, right? With this idea of perhaps salvation or grace in mind, right? The what comes after part. Moving forward, think it speaks to the suffering of all life. The spider is again alive. Something miraculous has happened here. And for a moment, life sprouts all around him. He says androids have better perspective because they do not benefit from this community of empathic exchange. Mercer starts to talk to him. Mercer says that despite this expose and finding out that everything is fake, what does Mercer say? He says people will go on believing in Mercerism. There will be a need for it. It will not fade. People will not turn away. We desperately cling to a symbolism that gives us hope for rebirth and rest. Perhaps the facts of the matter don't even matter. It's the need for some crucial symbolism in our life. Because what's really needed is the rebirth, the idea that we can change within this lifetime, perhaps within others, right? However you see things. He gives Isidore a restored spider. It's almost like a gift that Mercer gives him, a restored spider, all legs back intact. And I'll ask you the question as you stop and take kind of note of this and inventory. What is the complete symbolism here? What is he handing back to Isidore?